What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Thor: Love and Thunder is no perfect movie. And it's getting harder and harder to say that with every MCU movie as the years go by, but here we go. In Love and Thunder, Thor, once again played by Chris Hemsworth, is trying to find inner peace after the events of Endgame by going on missions with the Guardians of the Galaxy in a completely pointless 5-minute cameo that is being played up in all of the trailers just to suck you in, making you think that that will be at least the first half of the film, which, to be honest, if there was an entire movie of just Thor traveling with the Guardians of the Galaxy, that would have been a hell of a lot more interesting than what we get here. Actually, you know what? I take that back, because the Guardians consider Thor all of a sudden the black sheep of the group compared to the Avengers movies where they were in awe of him. I don't understand that whatsoever, and they don't really make it clear why, but in any case, Gorr the God Butcher, played by Christian Bale, is out on a quest to kill all the gods in the universe as a form of revenge for past actions. And after he kidnaps all the children of New Asgard as bait, Thor teams up with his ex-girlfriend, Jane Foster, played once again by Natalie Portman, who all of a sudden has his exact same powers and a rebuilt version of Mjolnir, so that they can hopefully rescue the children, defeat Gorr, and rekindle their romance. Oh yeah, and Valkyrie and Korg are technically in this movie, but again, more on that later. And as you can tell, I wasn't really excited to check this movie out for a variety of reasons. I felt like everything that was interesting and likable about Thor as an individual for his own solo movies had started with Ragnarok, but ended with Endgame, weirdly enough. So, again, outside of him going on missions with Guardians of the Galaxy, I didn't feel like there was any more about his character arc to explore. The trailer didn't really sell me on it either because the jokes were few and far between and pretty predictable. I didn't think the action set pieces that they showed were really that interesting. And like a lot of people, I'm not 100% sure how people feel about this because I don't talk about it very often, but I did not buy into Natalie Portman whatsoever as Mighty Thor. I thought she looked ridiculous in the costume. The first time you see her in the trailer, she actually kind of looked bored out of her mind. She was such a boring character in the previous movies that it made no difference to me to see her come back, even when Taika Waititi was the one who enticed her to return. Long story short, I had no high hopes to see this movie, but much to my surprise, it was actually worse than I thought it was going to be. In fact, Thor: Love and Thunder is one of the worst MCU movies I've ever seen. I don't know if it's the worst of Phase 4, but it's one of the worst Marvel adaptations, again, that I can think of in recent memory. But as per usual, I'm going to stick with the positives, because to be honest, there are a small amount of flaws, but those flaws are incredibly huge on their own. For starters, the acting technically isn't bad. Chris Hemsworth is still pitch perfect casting as Thor, and I love the way that he's able to balance out the modern day mannerisms that he's learned over the years with his traditional ancient Nordic dialect, often in the exact same sentence, without ever missing a beat in terms of his line delivery and his comedic timing. He's got it made more than any other actor that I can imagine ever taking on this kind of role. And kind of like Multiverse of Madness, it's a similar circumstance where the hero, the sidekick, and the villain all have a common motive in that they've lost a lot of important people in their lives that has led them to become in denial of their situation. They've made a ton of questionable choices to drown out their pain, but the relationship between hero and sidekick, once they meet up and go on this quest, is supposed to help them grow as people in order to accept the fact that there are some things in the past that they can't change, and some things in the future where they're going to have to make sacrifices for the benefit of other people. That's what it means to be a hero, and the whole point, theoretically, of Love and Thunder is for Thor to remember what it is to be a hero, which I felt like that was already reestablished in Endgame, and this is one of those rom-coms where the main couple goes back and forth between a lot of awkward, hey, good to see you, hey, remember when we did this and that, good times. And then a few seconds later, they'll start blaming each other for why they broke up. I really can't stand these cliches, and it was the reason that I couldn't get into their relationship, which is a pity, because the two of them have the best chemistry between each other out of all of these movies. Natalie Portman easily gives her best performance out of any of these, which I know isn't really saying that much, but at the same time, it is good to see her give a much more sense of relatability towards this character, because even though she's technically a lot stronger physically and intellectually than before, she still has actual character flaws. And without spoiling anything, I spent the entire movie just watching her arc thinking, okay, this is going to be nicely wrapped up like a bow. Why am I supposed to care during all of these dramatic moments? And I'm happy to say, without giving anything away, for once, I was wrong. There were actual sacrifices that she and Thor had to make as a team and as a couple. The end credits scene makes me wonder if they're going to wrap up her arc nicely in a bow in future installments, but I'm just going to have to play the waiting game on that one. And like every review has pointed out, the best parts of this movie revolve around Christian Bale as Gorr, who is fantastic. He is one of the best MCU villains ever. In fact, whenever he's on screen, everything from the tone, the writing, and the direction all feel like its own separate, much better movie. The first and the last scene revolving around his arc were shot and edited more like a Terrence... They were reminiscent of a Terrence Malick movie. In fact, if Terrence Malick made scenes anything close to resembling this, I'd be much more into his filmography. There are these beautiful, often surreal visuals that tell his story where you do sympathize with the past actions that have happened to him. You really understand the pain that he is going through. He is over the top in a quiet way in terms of performance, where his timing, his facial expressions, and his voice are slowly drawn out to make him more sadistic and intimidating when he's exacting revenge on other gods. And his design definitely helps, where his scarred flesh is all black and white except for these really ominous orange eyes. His superpowers were so damn cool, made him a legitimate threat where I honestly didn't know how the heroes were going to defeat him. It led to some of the best action sequences in the movie, the one where he does take over New Asgard, and the highlight in the movie, the one time that I was truly invested, was this black and white, almost horror fight scene where some of the objects are colorized as they're fighting. It was such a trippy, cool visual that made me think, why wasn't Gorr the villain, one of the villains in Multiverse of Madness? In fact, if anything, the way that his arc ends, it was so beautiful, and everything previous to that fit a horror atmosphere, not reminiscent of Sam Raimi, but at least one that could fit a Marvel horror movie vibe. It made me wish that this was a horror comedy centered on Thor and Gorr, because the way that it wraps up, their lives are kind of intertwined in a way that I wasn't expecting, and Taika Waititi certainly proves for these scenes that he's capable of doing so. But beyond that, I have legitimately no idea what he was thinking when he was making this movie. If the final product even was what he was thinking at all. Because he gave a recent interview where he admitted that he'd been watching a bunch of director's cuts, where he said that director's cuts, in his opinion, suck, are 4 hours long, and that directors need to be more controlled. Never mind that there's a shit ton of evidence that proves otherwise. That makes me wonder how many director's cuts he's actually watched. A part of me wonders if he is crying for help to let us know that he wasn't really in control of the situation, because, no joke, no pun intended, every fucking Marvel comedy trope is in this movie. The constant one-liners that are old, desperate, and are often delivered at the most inappropriate sequences where there should not be any comedy whatsoever. Entire characters who I swear to God have gotten dumber than previous movies just for the sake of comedy, like our main hero. I swear, he forgot everything that he learned in Endgame just so this movie could exist. He has all of the mannerisms that he's learned in the previous movies, but he honestly feels like a fish out of water in the same way that he did in the first movie, which makes absolutely zero sense, because almost everyone that he talks to in this situation are familiar with him, and he's familiar to them. He knows how to act. He should know how to speak. I don't understand how he forgot all of these things. There are entire side characters whose sole purpose is just to be funny. And honest to God, they don't land a single joke. I think I laughed twice in this movie. Once because Nebula wanted to shoot something, and if I'm being honest, I really wish that she did shoot something. And Russell Crowe as an extended cameo, who I gotta be honest, I did not think that Russell Crowe could tell a joke, but I'm happy to say, even though he had a really questionable accent, that did kind of add to the comedic element of it. And out of all the characters, he was one that felt zany for an actual purpose. It's embarrassing to watch that Taika Waititi as a filmmaker and Marvel as a studio feel as if you can't, as soon as these heroes are on screen, you can't go 30 seconds without hearing a joke come out of their mouths. They feel as if you don't want any fresh or new material, just the exact same bits repeated over and over and over again until you finally laugh. There are so many sequences where characters within one scene tell the exact same joke over and over again, and I don't understand why. It didn't work the first time. What makes you think it's going to work again? And look, here's the thing. Before Endgame, I did not give a shit how many jokes were in a Marvel movie. I had to defend the MCU amongst my other film nerd friends in high school. But that was because the jokes were funny. It was because the actors were funny. They had great timing. They had great chemistry. The objective of the film was to make you smile and laugh at these characters because of how likable they are. As opposed to now, where it feels like you're supposed to laugh at them because they're referencing pop culture or they're referencing liberal politics, which is not the reason I go see a Marvel movie. I don't go to a Marvel movie or a movie in general to be reminded of the real life struggles I'm going to a movie to escape from, or to be reminded of other better movies that I could have just stayed home to watch. At least with Thor Ragnarok, 80% of the dialogue was improvised. And that's what made it stand out from other Marvel movies. The actors had to think off the cuff and use their imagination while still staying true to their characters. It felt fresh, it felt spontaneous, it felt a hell of a lot more natural, and it was more reminiscent of Taika Waititi's signature style. With this movie, it feels like it was written by a focus group who just wanted to see their favorite bits from the previous movies just repeated on every 5 minutes. I mean, remember when Matt Damon was an Asgardian theater performer? That scene was funny because Matt Damon as a cameo was, yes, a surprise, but it was funny because he was so over the top, and yet he was painting Thor as a more likable hero than he actually was. In this movie, he and a bunch of other celebrity cameos come back for really no reason other than to repeat Ragnarok with no changes whatsoever, so the comedy is already gone. The only reason it's funny is because, hey look, it's Matt Damon, hey look, it's Melissa McCarthy, and her husband who has no lines because he needed a job. Again. And I'm not fucking kidding, they lead to one of the most cringeworthy jokes in the entire film, where after the new Asgardian kids get kidnapped, which by the way, is in the middle of a battle where people are screaming on the streets, there are explosions going off, monsters are being sliced, lots of noise, but all the kids are somehow asleep. Lord knows kids can fall asleep during any of that, but once they're kidnapped, everybody's panicking, they're in a town hall conference where everyone's talking over each other, they don't know what to do, and then the theater company walks up to Valkyrie and says, hey, can we turn this entire kidnapping into a play? Are you... Fuck you! Oh, God! Worst part is, that isn't even as stupid as these loud, obnoxious, screaming goats that are Thor's animal sidekicks so they can take his Asgardian ship across dimensions, even though he can literally teleport to other dimensions on his own anyway, so it's completely redundant. Never mind the fact that Thor is literally in a love triangle with Mjolnir and Stormbreaker. I wish I was kidding, folks, but I'm not. His hammer and his axe have a conscience and feelings the same way that Doc Ock's tentacles do. And Stormbreaker, the axe, is jealous because Thor keeps looking at Mjolnir. I gotta ask, who the fuck asked for this? When people keep saying that this is an SNL skit turned into a 2-hour movie, they really weren't kidding. But it's a 2020 SNL skit, so there's no humor to be had with it. At least in Doc Ock's case, the tentacles were an AI attached to his body, so it made sense why it would fuck with his brain and have its own feelings. There was nothing in the previous movies that I can remember anyways where it was even possible for a hammer and an axe to have feelings. And with Natalie Portman, one would think that giving her a sense of humor would be a major improvement to such a dull character. And they try to make her into someone who is physically and intellectually strong but socially awkward, and that she's not coming up with good one-liners every time she kicks someone's ass, or she's a fish out of water in Asgardian culture where she doesn't really understand the customs or the mythology, which is very reminiscent of Webby from DuckTales. So already, this is a character archetype that I should be able to connect with. But the reason it worked for Webby is because she spent her entire life training in her skills at the expense of hanging out with kids her age and gaining social skills. Mostly because she wasn't allowed to be, but even if she had the option, she would have spent more time training either way until she got to meet her cousins. With Mighty Thor, she masters her powers in a matter of not even a day, without any training whatsoever, without any idea how to use the powers before she got the hammer, and she's already just as invincible, if not more invincible than Thor, because, again, you gotta have a girl power message even when it makes absolutely zero sense. And it was for that exact reason that I was rolling my eyes the entire time, because she was so invincible. I felt that there were no stakes for her, except for that dramatic part where she actually does have something special to lose. It was considerably more interesting, it was more important to the story and Thor's relationship, but it's not given enough focus. It's mostly told through exposition during the last third of the movie, where yes, I did technically start to care, but it was so annoying and underutilized throughout the first two thirds that it wasn't worth it at the end, which, from an actual storytelling perspective, that is actually the big problem with Love and Thunder, is that the pacing is all over the place to the point where the segue between horror and comedy is never built up because it happens within a matter of a split second. A comedic scene will switch to a horror scene with no transition, or the tone can switch from being lighthearted to dark and grim within the exact same scene, again, with no tension or build-up whatsoever. There are entire important plot details that happen off-screen, such as when Mighty Thor does get Mjolnir. It turns out that once Gorr takes over New Asgard and Thor joins in on the battle, it turns out Mighty Thor had already been in town and gotten to know everybody, including Valkyrie, which... Did they know that she was Thor's ex? Why did they let her stay in this town even if they didn't know who she was? Why did the Hammer even choose her to begin with? I get that they gave her an explanation, whereas Mjolnir, since it has feelings, knows who Jane was, but again, there was nothing established in the previous movies where it actually made sense on that level. And there are entire characters who disappear half the time where I forgot they were even in the movie because of how poorly paced and poorly focused on each character was. Especially Valkyrie. I should not forget that fucking Valkyrie, one of the best characters of Ragnarok, the new queen of Asgard, she should have just as equal a presence as Thor and Mighty Thor. But Tessa Thompson is so underutilized, and I'm not even kidding, she doesn't even take part in the final battle, despite the fact that she's Queen of Asgard and it's the new Asgardian children that they're sending out to rescue. It makes no fucking sense. Not that she really had an arc to begin with, considering her entire development is told through a montage of her being bored with the mundane aspects of ruling over a peaceful town, because, you know, someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder from watching her entire people being slaughtered in a battle would be bored by having a peaceful town to live in and rule over and have responsibility for. Thor's the one who wants inner peace. Like, why don't you just swap places? You know what? We gotta have a female ruler. Never mind. And, speaking of females, is it true that Valkyrie is into ladies this time like the Marvel producers promised? Yes. Yes, she is. And you can tell because she kisses a girl on the hand before leaving her and never seeing her again. And also, they tell us the exact same backstory that we already learned about her in Ragnarok, so it was already well established that she lost a woman important to her in battle in Ragnarok. I don't understand why there was controversy over that to begin with. You could put the pieces together yourselves, guys. Like, use your imagination for once instead of having everything spoon-fed to you. And the worst part about it is, Taika as a writer or Marvel as a studio are so convinced that prioritizing a character's sexuality, two characters, because one character turns out to be gay in the last 10 seconds of the movie, for no reason. It doesn't affect the character. It doesn't affect... You know what? I'm just going to flat out say it. They made Korg gay for really no reason. And I say no reason because, for starters, Korg has no purpose to be in the movie as a sidekick, seeing as how there are two people, Valkyrie and Mighty Thor, who kick way more ass anyways, let alone moving the story forward. He mainly narrates a bunch of montages where it's supposed to be funny because he gets people's names wrong. You made the dumbest character gay. I'm not really sure that you're doing the LGBTQ community any favors by having the dumbest, most annoying character in the movie gay. Unless that many people find him funny, in which case, good for you. I personally don't. But yeah, I just hated the fact that when Valkyrie's bisexuality was introduced, it was her sexuality that was her defining character trait, as opposed to who did she lose in battle? What was her name? When did they meet? Did they meet when they were children or when they were assigned as Valkyries? Was she a good warrior? How heroic of a battle did she die in? You know, actual character development that would make the LGBTQ characters in Marvel movies just as fleshed out as the straight characters. I'm sorry, but making a character gay, bi, or anywhere in between, or just diverse altogether, doesn't make them developed. It doesn't make them interesting. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The background gay dads in a DuckTales episode for 30 seconds, no dialogue whatsoever, were still more interesting. Because when you see how their children interact with each other, let alone with their friends, you can see very clearly how their past actions have shaped the way they are as grown adults, and how they've in turn raised two great children. I want LGBTQ characters just as much as anybody else, but I want them to be developed. I want them to be treated as normal people, not people who are out of the box. That defeats the whole fucking purpose. Look, you know it's a bad sign when Kat Dennings is in it for 5 minutes and she's somehow not the most annoying character in a Thor film. This is legitimately one of the worst Marvel movies I've ever seen. While the acting is decent and the soundtrack, as lazy as it is, Taika Waititi just picks the 3 Guns N' Roses songs that people know off the cuff. It did make some of the action scenes a lot more interesting. The actors, whenever they did tell a funny joke, which was few and far between, they made it work, and Christian Bale had so much potential as a terrific villain. It all just gets squandered by the Marvel formula and the expectations of what audiences want movies to convey in terms of story and messages. It just forgot to be entertaining. And for all those reasons, I'm going to give Thor: Love and Thunder a 1.5 out of 5. Thank you as always for watching, everybody. If you have seen Love and Thunder, you more than likely disagree with me. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.